So a lot of people maybe, after learning about race lighting and hearing how it impacts them, they might say, well, what do we do about this? Because it's one thing to know, but it's another thing to feel empowered to do something about it. What would you say?
Yeah, there are four things that I would offer, right? First is you got to learn more about this. You got to read about racial microaggressions and race lighting and racial battle fatigue. Because the more you know, then the more tools you have to make sense of what you're experiencing. And when you can make sense of what you're experiencing, then you're less likely to internalize it and engage in, the self-blame. You're able to actually put the blame and put the onus where it belongs, which is not on you, right?
So I'm going to stop you there. So that's why it's important to be able to say, this is race lighting or not.
Right.
To know the difference between active race lighting and passive race lighting. To know the difference between whether it's stereotype advancement, resistive actions, or the other types of race lighting we talk about, right? That language is important because it helps to empower you, because then you can examine that experience as almost an artifact, and you can put it into a box and you can say, this is what it is, and this is how I'm experiencing it, and you have a name for it. And naming racism, naming oppression is important because it makes it less powerful. It doesn't take away the hurt, but it gives you a sense of control over a condition and an experience that's less controllable.
It's like anything, right? If you have a pain in your back and you have no idea, like, man, why am I experiencing this chronic pain in my back, right? And you may start to wonder, oh no, is it this, is it that? And then you finally go to the doctor and you get a diagnosis, right? And even if it's a tough diagnosis, there is sometimes a sense of relief in knowing exactly what it is and being able to have a plan to actually do something about it. And I think the same thing happens when it comes to race lighting.
So you said learn more. What else?
Second, you have to identify spaces and communities that are healthy and healing. And so, for example, let's say you're a professor in an academic department at your university or your college, and that it's a very racist and unhealthy place. Well, part of what you have to do is be able to know, okay, in my department, this is who I'm dealing with, and this is what I'm going to experience. But I could also find opportunities to connect with and collaborate with folks in the cultural centers, or I can do work with my colleagues in student affairs, right? And so being able to kind of, not only know what it is, what it's like at quote unquote home, so to speak, but also knowing and being able to identify and spend more time in spaces that are more healthy and more conducive to your belonging and success is another important thing you can do.
Yeah, because I would think that those spaces are important because you're more likely to experience people who are going to provide you with that reassurance that you need.
Right.
That it's not you, it's them.
Right.
That you're not unintelligent, that you're brilliant. That you're not a criminal, that you are moral. That you're not of lesser worth, but you're a person who is of value. And you can only get those messages from people who are either allies or people who are part of your own community. And so I think it's important that we transition to those spaces because they're healthier for us. Because if you stay in that environment where you're experiencing race lighting and that's the only environment that you're in, that echo chamber can be debilitating. Right? But if you're in an environment where people are pushing back on that message and they're breathing life into you by validating you and giving you those important messages that you need to hear that counter what you're hearing in those unhealthy environments, I can see how that would be absolutely critical for Black, Indigenous people of color who experience race lighting, particularly in a routine basis in a routine environment.
Number 3, radical self-care. You have to practice radical self-care. What does that mean? So self-care, we all know, is the things that we do to be healthy, whole, and to sustain ourselves in a healthy way. So for some people, it's going to the gym every day and exercising. For others, it may be meditating. For others, it may be participating in their faith-based communities, right? Whatever it is whatever healthy self-care practices that you find to be effective, you have to not only do those things on a regular basis, but you have to do them unapologetically. So you can't feel guilty about them, right? You have to do what you have to do to take care of yourself. And it's really important to do as you prepare to transition into these environments in which you are more likely to experience race lighting. So for example, if you know, hey, at my campus, at my institution, this is kind of my daily experience, and it's even more important to practice radical self-care in the morning before you get to campus, right? Is what we say you have to do.
But wait a second, you say radical self-care. Why is self-care radical?
Radical in the sense that we have to be unapologetic about it, and we have to do it a lot more often than we typically do. I would say you have to do it every single day. You need to spend at least 1 hour a day engaged in some kind of self-care. At least 1 hour a day.
You know, the only other thing I'd add to that is that I would also say that it can be radical in that it is a form of resistance.
Right.
Right?
Right.
If you're taking care of yourself and you're making so you're healthy physically, mentally, spiritually, in any other way or in all ways, that is a form of resistance to an oppressive system that wants to tear you down, that wants to subjugate you, that wants you to make you feel like it's you, that there's something wrong with you. So I think it can be radical in that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you said there's a fourth one, right?
The fourth one, got 2 words for you. Get out. As soon as you can, right? And so...
or else you'll be in the sunken place?
Well, right, yeah. Get out of the sunken place, right? And so now I will say this, it's not easy for people to just pick up and leave, right? And so in some ways, telling folks to get out, you know, there's probably an element of privilege that we have to own and recognize in that, right? Mm-hmm. But we say this, if and when you get the option to leave, you should leave, right? Find a place, spend more time, go somewhere where you're going to be valued, where you're going to be appreciated, where your gifts and talents are going to be rewarded. And, you know, only you know what that is and what you need in those spaces. And I would say it's important to get out before you reach your breaking point. You know, sometimes I think we believe that, you know, suffering is part of the human condition of being a person of color. If we're not suffering, then we're not real people of color.
Or we're not doing the fight.
Right. And, you know, and I think that's, you know, I mean, maybe that works in, you know, short periods of time, right? But I think if that becomes your daily, you know, way of existing, then that can be, that leads to stress. We know stress leads to a lot of unhealthy, you know, health outcomes. And so we have to be careful with that. Yeah. And so I would say get out as soon as you have the opportunity, recognizing again that getting out is not easy, you know, for some folks.
Yeah. So it's a more difficult recommendation to take, but you also have to balance it with what is within your control. And so it reminds me of a colleague we have here, Andre Branch.
Yeah.
And we were dealing with a challenge with my son in school in terms of how he was being treated by a teacher. He was being routinely criminalized, and it was starting to affect him physically. I mean, he was having that racial battle fatigue signs, physically, psychologically, cognitively. And one of the things he said to me was this is, never leave your child in an unhealthy environment for the sake of a quote-unquote good school.
Right.
And just because a school is good for all children doesn't mean it's going to be good for black children. Just because a college or university is good for all people in general doesn't mean it's going to be good for black, indigenous, and other people of color. So learn more, healthy spaces, radical self-care, and get out.